Welcome back to our continuing discussion on international society approach. I am Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and with me is Ms. Manisha as sign language interpreter. In the last lecture, we were discussing one of the most important thinkers on international society approach, Hedley Bull. Hedley Bull talks about international order and international justice. International order is a pattern or disposition of international activity that sustains the basic goals of society of states. On the other hand, international justice consists of moral rules which confer rights and duties upon states and nations. For example, the right of self-determination, the right of non-intervention in internal affairs of states, and the right to be treated equally by all states. This is something which all states require and demand, that they should be treated equally in the international organizations and also while dealing with other states. Hedley Bull also talks about fundamental goals of anarchical society. He sees the international system as an anarchical society, and he believes that there are some objectives and goals that anarchical society pursues. The first goal is preservation of the international order or international society. International order and society, which consists of first and foremost the states, but which also consists of many other types of organizations. For example, the international organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations, and many other organizations. They together constitute the international society or international order. Another goal of anarchical society is upholding the independence of member states, maintaining peace, and helping the member states to secure normative foundations of all social life, and above all, avoiding war. So, this is yet another goal of anarchical society according to Hedley Bull. The third goal is keeping of promises, which requires that the commitments and promises that states make, they should be upheld, they should be kept, and all states and other organizations should be conscious of this. The stability of possession is yet another goal of anarchical society. It requires mutual recognition of state sovereignty. All states should recognize other states as sovereign and equal. Hedley Bull also talks about three types of or three kinds of order in world politics. First is the order in social life, human relations, that is relations among and between individuals. Second is international order, which is between states in a system or in society of states. And the third is world order, which is all encompassing and which includes the entire humanity, the humankind, the whole of humankind. And this world order is more important, more fundamental, and more primordial than international order, because it includes entire humanity, because it includes, apart from the sovereign states, many other types of international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and MNCs and such other bodies. Hedley Bull also talks about responsibility of great powers for sustaining the international orders. So, the great powers have a responsibility to maintain and sustain the international order. Great powers, however, much like small powers, frequently behave in such a way as to promote disorder rather than order. So, when Hedley Bull says that it is their responsibility to sustain international order, this is a normative principle that he talks about. In reality, the states do not, even the great powers, often do not behave in a very responsible manner. Whether it is great powers or small powers, they frequently behave in a way that undermines order and promotes disorder. In this respect, he gives the example of superpowers during the Cold War period, United States and USSR, which sometimes acted responsibly, but at other times they could act irresponsibly. During most of 1950s and 1960s, when balance of power was maintained, when the two superpowers could, even if to a limited extent, interact with each other, they largely acted responsibly, though not entirely. But at times they acted irresponsibly. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, or sometimes during late 1970s and early 1980s, when they indulged in an all-out arms race between themselves. So, the great powers can be responsible or sometimes can be irresponsible. Hedley Bull also talks about balance of power. He talks about many types and kinds of balance of power. There is simple balance of power, which can be translated into bipolarity, which the world witnessed from end of the Second World War in 1945 up to 1990-1991, the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So, that was a bipolarity, and that can be called simple balance of power. There can be complex balance of power, which basically denotes multipolarity. So, after the end of the Cold War, after 1990s, during the past 2.5 decades, we have seen that how many other powers, including China, India, or some powers like Germany and Japan, they all have emerged either as important military or economic power, leading to a type of multipolarity, and this can be called a complex balance of power system. Hedley Bull also talks about general and local balance of power. General balance of power is when there are two states who are trying to balance each other, or there can be more than two states trying to balance each other also, but the local balance of power is limited to one region. For example, there is local balance of power, one can say, between India and China or between India and Pakistan. There can be a local balance of power in West Asia, for example, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or between Israel and Iran. So, these are local balance of power. Similarly, Hedley Bull believes that there can be objective balance of power and there can be subjective balance of power. The objective balance of power is one which exists on the ground, which can be seen or which can be felt. On the other hand, there can be a subjective balance of power which is more notional. It is in the realm of ideas. It does not exist in reality. Hedley Bull believes that there is no agreement between great powers on balance of power. This is Hedley Bull's proposition, his belief. But there are many like Hoffman who disagree with it, who believe that there have been instances in the last 70, 80 years of international relations when the great powers have agreed on a balance of power. For example, during the Cold War period, when United States and USSR were the two great powers or superpowers, they in a way maintained bipolarity and balance of power. So, Hoffman disagrees with Hadley-Bull and maintains that there can be agreement among great powers to maintain balance of power. Hadley-Bull also talks about nature of war in anarchical society. He believes that after the two general wars or two world wars, the first and the second, after the end of the Second World War, international society has limited interstate war but not intrastate war. That war among or between great powers have become rare after the Second World War. We have seen that United States and Soviet Union did not go to war. So, war between great powers has become rare, almost non-existent, except when they are using proxies. For example, in the Korean War or the Vietnam War, although US and USSR were not fighting against each other directly, but through their proxies, South Korea and North Korea, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, the two were involved in conflict and tension. So, although direct war between great powers has become rare after the end of Second World War, proxy wars have continued. Hadley-Bull also believes that there can be many types of intrastate war. For example, civil wars within the state among different groups. He talks about many other types of intrastate war. Hadley-Bull also believes that monopoly of war by states has promoted the value of order. So, in this respect, he is in agreement with realist school of thought in believing that states have performed a very critical and important role in maintaining order and to some extent in maintaining peace. If the states do not have monopoly of power or monopoly of war, then there can be other organizations who indulge in conflict, and that will only undermine international order. So, in that sense, Hadley-Bull was a believer in monopoly of war by states. Hadley-Bull also talks about three levels of justice in world politics. First, there is international or interstate justice, which is based on the concept of equal state sovereignty. So, all states are equal in world politics. There is no sovereign overarching authority above the states, and therefore, international system or interstate system is maintained, and this is interstate justice. There is individual or human justice, which is basically maintenance of human rights. It is a concept that began as individual rights in the 16th and 17th century, but by 20th century it took the form of human rights, and we know how human rights have become so important, how the United Nations came out with a Charter of Human Rights. So, that is another level of justice according to Hadley-Bull. The third level of justice is world justice. What is right or good for the world as a whole? For example, environmental standards. Now, world justice is something which is above international or interstate justice, because it talks about issues which concern the entire humanity. For example, environmental standards. The protection of environment is a concern not just for states, but for entire humanity and for all the other types of organizations and associations, and therefore it is a part of world justice. So, these are three types or levels of justice in world politics according to Hedley Bull. He also compares order and justice. Order is more fundamental for realization of other values. So, Hedley Bull understands that order is important. Order, international order, which states are required to maintain, which states are instrumental in maintaining, because there is no authority above them. So, international order is important, and order is fundamental because other values cannot be realized without order. However, he also believes that sometimes justice comes before order. For example, the right of self-determination of the colonies. So, now the self-determination of colonies is something which might have disturbed the European colonial order, but nevertheless it was more important than maintaining that colonial order, that European order. And therefore, he believes that sometimes justice takes precedence over order. World politics involves a balance between order and justice according to Hedley Bull. So, order is important, justice is important, and most important is maintaining order, maintaining balance between the two. There is yet another thinker of international society approach, John Vincent. He talks about balancing state sovereignty and human rights. He believes that there is something known as non-intervention, that states should respect each other's independence, that states should not interfere in the internal matter of other states, that states should treat each other as equals. So, that is the principle of non-intervention. However, there is also a principle of humanitarian intervention, which maintains and believes that security for people to protect human rights is more important than, sometimes is more important than non-intervention. So, humanitarian intervention in a way undermines state sovereignty, goes beyond state sovereignty, and John Vincent believes that humanitarian intervention is also an important aspect of international society. International society approach views world politics as a human world. So, world politics is primarily a human world, although the states dominate it, but its major concern goes beyond states. Humankind is its more important concern. It refuses to choose between liberal optimism and realist pessimism. Liberal optimism, which talked about the possibility of maintaining or establishing world peace, which believed that human beings are by nature good and cooperative. On the other hand, the realists were pessimistic about human nature, believing that humans are selfish, that humans are prone to war and conflict. So, international society refuses to choose between these two extreme positions of liberal optimism and realist pessimism, and tries to maintain a balance between the two. Barry Buzan is yet another very important thinker of international society approach, which is sometimes also called English school. So, Barry Buzan belonged to the English school, just as Hedley Bull belonged to English school. Now, Barry Buzan in many ways agrees with some of the realist positions, but in some other respects he disagrees with them. If I can recall Kenneth Waltz, one of the realist thinker or neo-realist thinkers, who believes that power relations of sovereign states is something which is most important. Who believed, Kenneth Waltz believed, that there are international structures which determine the behavior of states. So, international structures are most important component of international politics according to Kenneth Waltz, the realist thinker. However, Barry Buzan to some extent accepts this position. He says, acknowledges that international structures are important, but they are sustained not just by states, but by many other factors. They are sustained by sovereignty, by territoriality, by diplomacy, by great power relations, by equality of people, by nationalism, by market forces, by environmental concerns. So, Barry Buzan's position goes beyond that of Kenneth Waltz, who was a realist thinker, in believing that international structures are not just those which involve states, but goes beyond it, involving many other components like diplomacy, nationalism, market forces, environmental concerns. International society approach is a comprehensive approach. It is much more inclusive, it is much more complex and also subtle. It is receptive to the strong points of other approaches, for example, realism, liberalism, international law, international history. They are inspired by all these approaches, try to combine all these approaches, but they are closer to the empirical complexities of international relations. They are sensitive to normative dilemmas of statecraft, foreign policy and diplomacy. In this respect, they go beyond the realist position, who do not believe that there is anything beyond state sovereignty or beyond national interest. So, international society approach is more comprehensive, inclusive, complex and subtle and receptive to ideas from other schools. There is yet another distinction between world empire and world society. An empire is a hierarchical system between an imperial government and dependencies. Sovereignty belongs to the imperial government and dependencies are dependent on the imperial government or the colonial government which controls them. The British Empire was a good example of an empire. It had more than 60 colonies. It tried to maintain a certain type of colonial order involving all those colonies, which were controlled by the imperial government, but which had their own system of governance. So, British Empire is one example. Another example is US imperialism or dominance. This cannot be called something like a British empire because the US does not actually control the affairs of all the states which otherwise are under its dominance or influence. So, US imperialism or dominance is much more subtle, is much more complex. It involves entering into treaties, creating NATO, for example, or similar other treaties through which it maintains its control or influences other states, but cannot be called an empire. World society, on the other hand, refers to common interest and shared values that link human community. And this is something which goes beyond, or which is more fundamental than world empire, or more fundamental than imperialism or dominance by one or the other great power. The sovereign states, nevertheless, play a very important role. They play important role as defenders of humankind and as protectors of human rights. Sovereign states are important in upholding the world society. So, sovereign states play a very important role. International society is based on state sovereignty and is consistent with world society of human rights. There are three levels of responsibility: devotion to one's own nation and the well-being of its citizens according to White, then respect for legitimate interests and rights of other states and international law, and the third is respect for human rights, which is much more cosmopolitan. Summarizing the whole debate, one can say that international society approach focuses on international history, ideas, structures, institutions and values. The basic assumptions and claims of international society approach are: 1. At the heart of the subject are people and basic values, for example, security, independence, order and justice. Second, role of IR scholars is to interpret the thoughts and actions of people involved with international relations. Third, international anarchy is an important concept, but not an exclusive premise. World politics is not merely an international system. It is an anarchical society with distinctive rules, norms and institutions that states people are involved with in the conduct of foreign policy. And fourthly, there are two major concepts of international society theory. One is pluralistic society of multiple sovereign states, and the other is solidaritist world society of humans of the planet, which is above the states. Coming to the critique of international society approach, one can point out four types of critique. First, the realist critique, which believes that the evidence of international norms as determinants of foreign policy is very weak, if not non-existent. The second is liberal critique, which believes that democracy and such other concepts or progressive changes are not adequately taken account of by international society approach. The third is international political economy approach, which believes that international society approach doesn't take into account factors like international economic relations. The fourth criticism comes from within the international society approach, which points out the failure to explain the postmodern world. These are some of the critiques of international society. These are some of the references which students can utilize. Thank you very much.